The Ashcraftoft family's monthly dinners were less about food and more about financial peacocking. This evening in the sprawling estate outside Napa Valley promised to be especially unbearable. I took my usual seat near the fireplace, quietly observing as my cousins competed to see who could brag the loudest. "Just bought a ranch in Jackson Hole," Preston drawled, swirling his wine. "Right next to the guy who owns half of Silicon Valley." "Please," scoffed Cassandra, flipping open her designer clutch with a flourish. "We just closed on a vineyard in Tuscany. Anyway, private access to the Med. You can't even put a price on that kind of view." I hid my smile behind my glass of iced tea. If only they knew Nora.Aunt Evelyn's voice cut sharply across the table. "You've been awfully quiet." Preston leaned in, his faux sympathy dripping. "We were just wondering about your living situation." And there was. "What about it?" I replied, setting down my glass. "This cramped duplex in Portland," he said. "Still renting, right?" "The one on Alder Street," Cassandra added, feigning surprise. "Didn't know people our age still rented." I nearly laughed. The Alder Street complex was my company's first commercial acquisition under Westpine Holdings. To them I was a struggling tenant. In reality I was the owner. "I like the space," I said evenly. "You're 35, sweetie," Evelyn added with a patronizing smile. "It's time to grow up. Buy something real." "Real," I countered. "Try a $1.8 billion portfolio of multifamily buildings, commercial towers and, yes, Ashcraftoft Plaza." I paused. "The very property they gather for their monthly dinners. 6 months ago, I acquired it discreetly through a private equity arm they'd never trace back to me." I took a sip of my iced tea. "I've managed just fine." Preston smirked. "You can't even afford a mortgage." I leaned back and let them talk because soon the lease renewal would come across their desks. And guess whose name would be on the letterhead? Dad finally glanced up from his wine glass. Now, Preston. Not everyone's blessed with your sharp instincts. Nora chose her path." Aunt Evelyn chimed in with a sigh, as though I'd disappointed them by not marrying a hedge fund manager or becoming a lifestyle blogger. They thought I spent my days showing cheap walk-ups to broke grad students, barely scraping by on commission checks. What they didn't know was that Nora Hale, the family underachiever, was also Westpine Holdings, the anonymous firm quietly snapping up commercial and residential properties throughout the Pacific Northwest for the last decade. Speaking of real estate, Cassandra interjected with a sparkle in her eye. "Have you heard about that situation on Alder Street? Some firm bought the entire block. They're going to knock it all down." She added with mock pity, "Guess that little apartment of yours will finally go." I kept my expression neutral. I was the buyer and I had no intention of tearing anything down. The Alder Street complex was a hidden gem: brick facades, vintage detailing, rent protections for families who'd lived there for decades. I was deep in a historically respectful renovation. "Really?" I asked, feigning surprise. I hadn't heard. "Well, of course not," Preston smirked. "Deals that size are way out of your league. If you get booted," Evelyn said brightly, "you can always move back into the guest house. We'll help you find something more respectable. Maybe even someone respectable." "I'm happy," I said flatly. "And so is my landlord." Cassandra gave a tight laugh. "You can't live a small life forever, dear. Hale used to mean something in this state. It still did, just not the way they thought." In real estate circles, Westpine was synonymous with ethical growth and tenant-first investing, the antithesis of my cousin's flashy developments that bulldozed communities for clout. Actually, Dad set down his glass. "This meeting's partly about business. The board's worried about the new owner of Ashcraftoft Plaza." I tilted my head. "Westpine Holdings bought a majority stake 6 months ago," he said. "No one knows who they are. Possibly a foreign investor." Preston nodded. "Has to be. These tycoons love legacy properties. If only they knew that their feared mystery investor was sitting right here, in a thrifted cardigan and scuffed boots." "And now," Dad continued, "they're asking tough questions, especially about our accounting practices. Creative accounting, like the way Preston borrowed from the building fund to finance his Jackson Hole retreat, or how Cassandra labeled her luxury handbags as client engagement expenses." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Aunt Evelyn said, her pearls twitching with unease. "The Hale name still means something." "That's just it," Dad cut in. This Westpine person doesn't seem impressed by names. They've ordered a full audit. I watched the ripple of panic across their faces, masked behind their designer smiles. An audit would uncover more than questionable expenses. It would crack their whole game wide open. Maybe Nora could help, Cassandra suddenly said, her tone sugary. She works in real estate, doesn't she? Maybe she knows someone at the management company. Everyone turned to me at once. Just like that, I was no longer an embarrassment. I was potentially useful. I mostly work with smaller residential clients, I said smoothly. Nothing on the scale of Ashcraftoft Plaza. For God's sake, Preston snapped, you can't even help your own family. Mom shot him a warning glance, but her silence said enough. Even Dad was back to scrolling, uninterested in defending me. They had no idea how helpful I was about to be, just not in the way they hoped. Tomorrow morning, Westpine Holdings would release a public statement. Effective immediately, Ashcraftoft Plaza would undergo major operational reform. No more shadow budgets. No more nepotistic contracts. No more charging the building like it was a family credit card. I glanced around the penthouse. Artwork bought with maintenance funds, couches triple their listed price, fixtures installed by Cassandra's husband's firm with bloated invoices. Anyway, I said, rising and brushing off my jeans, some of us have early mornings. Cassandra smirked. Off to show more rent-controlled studios. I slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder. Inside, the board briefing, legal filings and renovation proposals were worth more than anything else in this room. No, Nora.Aunt Evelyn called sweetly. Next time maybe dress more like a Hale. Appearances matter. I smiled. Don't worry, I said. Tomorrow, I'll look exactly like the Hales expect. They just didn't realize I was already the one running the show. If you've been quietly rooting for Nora all along, don't miss what happens when the boardroom doors open. Subscribe to the channel so you're the first to see how the family reacts when they realize the nobody they dismissed now holds the keys to everything. The next morning I stood in my real office, an entire penthouse floor overlooking downtown Portland, prepared for the moment I'd planned for over a year. My assistant Isla walked in briskly, setting a cappuccino beside my laptop. The Ashcraftoft Plaza board is already seated, she said. Your family got here early, trying to charm the independent members. I smirked, imagining Preston and Cassandra working the room in desperation. Audit packets had all been printed and distributed. The forensic team uncovered even more than expected. She paused. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once they know, there's no turning back. They need to learn, I replied quietly. That legacy isn't a license to abuse power. I turned to the glass, catching my reflection. Gone were the jeans and cardigan. Today I wore a deep navy Altasara suit, sharp lines, soft strength. The kind of look Aunt Evelyn used to dream I'd wear to meet a husband. Instead, I'd wear it to dismantle their house of cards. The ownership announcement goes live in 20 minutes, Isla added. Once it hits, you'll be unmasked. Then let's begin, I said, picking up my briefcase. The Ashcraftoft Plaza boardroom hushed as I entered. My family was clustered at the far end, unnerved, underdressed, and visibly rattled. Who are you? Preston barked. This is a private meeting. I calmly placed my briefcase at the head of the table. I'm Nora Hale, I said. Founder and sole owner of Westpine Holdings, the company that owns this building and several others your family leveraged illegally. Evelyn turned ghost white. Cassandra's lips parted, but no sound came. My father's hands tightened on his pen. Nora, he breathed. I nodded. Good morning. I opened the briefcase and began sliding audit reports across the table. Shall we review your financials? This is insane, Preston stammered. You're just what? I cut in. The black sheep? The renter? The woman in consignment clothes? Cassandra blinked. But you show apartments. I work. I smiled. And I built something real, with integrity, not illusion. The board watched stunned as the proud Hale family began to unravel, one page at a time. These folders, I said, contain detailed documentation of every misused fund, inflated invoice and falsified receipt. Reports of financial irregularities involving Ashcraftoft Plaza's accounts. I distributed the final set of documents. Preston, Would you care to explain the $2 million in roof repairs that financed your Jackson Hole property? He flushed so hard and fast I thought he might pass out. Or Cassandra, I continued, flipping the next page, maybe you'd like to walk us through your husband's invoices, charging 3 times the market rate for basic plumbing? Aunt Evelyn gasped. No, I said evenly. You aired it out. I'm just making sure it gets cleaned. Dad finally spoke, voice low and pleading. Nora, sweetheart, we can explain. Don't, I said, raising a hand. I've watched this family treat our great-grandfather's legacy like a personal ATM. While you mocked my so-called humble life, I was building something better. On values, not vanity. But why? Cassandra asked, dazed. Why pretend to be struggling? I didn't pretend anything, I replied. I lived modestly. I invested wisely. You assumed wealth had to be loud. Preston, I said, flipping the next page. The Alder Street building. You really live there? I own it, I corrected. And most of the block. And no, I'm not demolishing it because some of us care about people, not just returns. Suddenly, phones around the table buzzed. One board member looked up, reading from his screen. Westpine Holdings reveals CEO's identity. Nora Hale, a strange member of the Hale family, confirmed as owner of a $2 billion real estate portfolio. Fumbling her phone, she muttered, ranked among top ethical developers, historic preservation, tenant protections. This will ruin us. No, I said firmly. This will save you from yourselves. Effective today, I continued, Ashcraftoft Plaza will operate transparently. No more shell games, no more sweetheart contracts, and no more charging the building like it's a family credit card. Preston tried to sound bold, but his voice trembled. Then I'll pass these reports to the authorities. I'm sure the IRS would find them enlightening. Silence thickened. What do you want? Dad finally asked. I want you to remember what the Hale name meant before all this, I said, meeting their eyes one by one. Great-grandfather built communities, not just profit margins. I gathered my papers. You have a choice. Work with me to restore that legacy or find somewhere else to live. I hear there are some lovely rentals in Lake Assago. I turned to leave. Nora, wait. Dad's voice stopped me just as I reached the door. I was wrong about you. Yes, I replied quietly. The aftermath unfolded like something out of a business drama. The media couldn't get enough of the hidden Hales of Portland, who'd quietly built a real estate empire and dismantled their family illusions in one board meeting. Aunt Evelyn resigned from 3 local boards, too ashamed to show her face. Cassandra's husband's firm folded within weeks of the audit release. But not all was bitter. She was arrested, finally facing real consequences, and enrolled in a public university's real estate program. Cassandra later told me it gave her more purpose than gallery openings ever had, and she began volunteering at a transitional housing shelter downtown. Dad asked to learn the business, not as a father reclaiming control but as a student. This time he wanted to understand what I'd built. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Alder Street apartment. As I kept it, reviewing new quarterly reports. Ashcraftoft Plaza was thriving. Leases were stable, tenant satisfaction was up, and small retailers on the ground floor were turning healthy profits. A knock broke my focus. I opened the door to find my mother. She wore jeans and no makeup. It took me a moment to process the casualness. I got your invitation, she said, holding it up. A courtyard holiday party, I nodded. It's not quite your scene, she admitted, glancing around my modest space. No, I said. But I'm learning maybe scene isn't everything. She picked up a photo, me at 23, beaming at my real estate license ceremony. I never asked, she said. Why this path? Because I wanted to build something real, I replied. Not just buy it and flaunt it. She looked at me seriously. And now you control more than all of us. I do, I nodded. But control isn't the goal. Purpose is. He studied me. Will you teach me,